At a time when J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, had publicly denied the existence of organized crime on American soil, Life magazine was tearing down this facade with relentless fervor. The Kennedy administration had begun to peel back the curtain on these lies, hinting at deeper revelations that could have reshaped national understanding had tragedy not cut their efforts short. As the 60s gave way to the 70s, the Exposé signaled a transformative era. The CIA, once bedfellows with the Mafia, clandestine operations, began distancing itself from these Italian-American mobsters, though whispers of connections with Carlos Marcello persisted. The Life magazine feature meticulously detailed the Mafia's operations, from Meyer Lansky's notorious casino skimming operations to Joe Bonanno's bold power grabs. The explosive coverage did more than just the public, it ignited a firestorm. The FBI, stung by accusations of deep-seated corruption, its agent's unofficial moniker Bobby Boys, was depicted as fiercely committed to battling organized crime, driven by a vendetta stemming from the assassination of President Kennedy. Wiretaps proliferated, spilling secrets, the sanction of court orders, as paranoia seeped into the Mafia's ranks. Life magazine, wielding its journalistic sword, continued its crusade with follow-up pieces struck at the heart of mob power. A 1970 article laid bare Carlos Marcello's iron grip on Louisiana, painting a vivid picture of Jim Garrison as his puppet. With each page turned, the magazine didn't just report the news, it roared it, shaking the pillars of organized crime and challenging the mobsters who thought themselves untouchable. The battle lines were drawn not just in secret meetings or shadowy alleyways, but on the very pages of Life magazine, marking an era where media power and mafia clashed spectacularly. In 1943, Benjamin Siegel, a figure well versed in the world of organized crime, approached Charlie Luciano with a proposal to invest in a casino in the Las Vegas desert. At the time, many in the criminal underworld scoffed at the idea, but Luciano, who held deep respect and admiration for Siegel, backed his venture. Siegel, who was present at major criminal conventions alongside notables like Al Capone and Tony Accardo, had earned a distinguished reputation among his peers. Siegel's ambitious project, which he named the Flamingo, eventually drew investments from various factions of organized crime. Contrary to popular belief, it was not Meyer Lansky, but Frank Costello who spearheaded these efforts, leveraging his control over American gambling operations. Costello's influence was significant. Everything he touched seemed to prosper. Even when New York families halted their funding, Costello successfully sought support from the Chicago outfit, the Louisiana outfit, the Trafficante family, the Corsican Mafia, and others. However, Lansky played a critical role when he uncovered troubling issues at the Flamingo. He discovered that materials like glass and concrete were being stolen and resold to Siegel, and the construction faced continuous setbacks due to union extortion and contractor fraud. These challenges, combined with Siegel's increasingly erratic behavior and disrespect towards other crime figures like Gus Greenbaum, began to tarnish his reputation and strain his relationships. Tragically, these issues culminated in Siegel's murder in 1947, a grim outcome that Luciano learned about while in Italy. After Siegel's death, Lansky took over the Flamingo and, following the fall of Havana, turned it into a tremendously profitable venture. Organized crime's influence in Las Vegas didn't just extend to casino operations. They pioneered entertainment and transformed the city into a vibrant hub, effectively creating modern Las Vegas as a testament to their power. The empire that organized crime built in Las Vegas was formidable, and dismantling it would require nothing short of a full-scale war, which began in the 1960s. This conflict coincided with Fidel Castro seizing control of casino operations in Cuba, significantly affecting Lansky's power. Nevertheless, Lansky and other mob figures continued to invest in Las Vegas, turning it into a multi-billion-dollar asset that brought in legitimate revenue through innovative financial schemes like money laundering and casino skimming, a practice that had been ongoing since the inception of their casino ventures. On September 1st, 1967, the titans of organized crime were rocked to their core when Life magazine splashed their secretive dealings across its pages. Figures like Carlos Marcello, Carlo Gambino, Sam Giancana, Tony Accardo, also known as Joe Batters, Joe Zerilli, the boss of Detroit, and a host of others including the Patriarca family and Angelo Bruno, found themselves the unwilling stars of an exposé that reverberated through the underworld. The publication, synonymous with journalistic bombshells, laid bare the Mafia's intricate web of illegal activities, with Dallas, the infamous city of Civello, and the Campisi family, where President Kennedy was assassinated, taking center stage. This wasn't just another article. It was a seismic event that shook the very foundations of organized crime in America. Call it the mob. The name fits. Although any of a half-dozen others, the outfit, the Syndicate, La Cosa Nostra, the Mafia serves about as well. Whatever it is called, it exists, and the fact of its existence is a national disgrace. In this issue and the next, Life reveals the structure, tactics, ruthlessness, and alarming strength of this brazen empire. The mob is a fraternity of thugs, but it holds such power, wealth, and influence that in one way or another it poisons us all. It rigs elections, and in so doing destroys the democratic process. More and more it is muscling into legitimate business, local, national, and international, to the extent that nearly every American is paying into its treasury in countless unsuspected ways. The 5,000 members of Cosa Nostra are all of Italian background, and most of them are Sicilians. Abetting them is a larger army of non-members of many creeds and origins, who wittingly or unwittingly do the mob's bidding. The scale and sophistication of its operations challenge the imagination. The President's Crime Commission estimates the mob's annual profit from illegal gambling alone at 6 to 7 billion. Loan sharking, narcotics, labor racketeering, skimming, and all the varieties of extortion in which it deals bring in enormous additional sums wrenched out of the poor and those least able to resist the exploiters. Through the mechanism of the fix, it can and too often does control congressmen, state officials, and law enforcement men. The mob is in fact a government of its own, with its own laws, enforced with torture and murder. It is organized with ruthless efficiency to achieve its ends and protect its members from prosecution. At the top is a ruling body which settles internal disputes and preserves discipline. Beneath this supreme council are the officers and troops, the men who do the corrupting, bribing, extorting, terrorizing, robbing, and killing. The crime syndicate of today came into being with Prohibition, and has continued to thrive and grow despite sporadic bursts of public concern. One of the principal reasons for this is that existing legal machinery is simply unable to cope with it. Criminal laws deal with individual crimes, not an international association. The mob's multi-tiered hierarchy insulates its leaders from direct participation in the crimes they order. To the continuing despair of police agencies, it has also benefited vastly from recent court decisions limiting the admissibility of evidence. Most of all, the mob has fattened itself on the public's appetite for its services: dope, sex, and gambling, and apathy toward its evil. From the gateposts, topped by menacing bronze swans with wings angrily outspread, the driveway leads up about 2 blocks to the Great Stone Mansion near Livingston, New Jersey. The drive is overhung by trees and flanked with flowers in gargoyle-shaped pots. The style might be called Transylvania traditional, with overtones of the owner's native Sicily. At a jog in the road is a cluster of painted family statues dominated by one of the squires himself, Richie Boiardo, astride a horse. It is a chilling place even in the warmth and sun of an August morning. A lot of Mr. Boiardo's fellow gangsters are mortally afraid of going up that driveway alone. Some who did never return. As mobsters go, Ruggiero Boiardo, Richie the Boot, as he is called, is not a very big shot. Nonetheless, he is a significant figure in organized United States crime, and his estate literally is one of its monuments. Boiardo is a capo, captain, in the 600-member Cosa Nostra family of Vito Genovese. Now a stoop-shouldered man of 76, he putters in his flower beds and mutters imprecations against the world in general. They call Boiardo a thief, a killer," he complained to one recent caller. "They call him Cosa Nostra, trouble." Two other New Jersey gangsters, Angelo the Gyp DiCarlo and Anthony Russo, once babbled like schoolboys about the foul deeds that had been committed beyond these colorful gates. As an informant was to relate, the conversation went like this. "Stay away from there," said Russo. "So many guys have been hit there. There's this furnace way up in back. That's where they burned them." DiCarlo, fascinated, asked for details. Russo cheerily ticked off victims by their first names. Oliver, Willie, Little Harold, Tony. He himself, Russo bragged, had carried Little Harold to the furnace by a chain tied to the dead man's throat. Authorities are convinced Russo was not exaggerating. Certainly, the number of victims incinerated at Boiardo's estate exceeds the number buried on the much-publicized chicken farm near Lakewood, New Jersey, where remains of 2 bodies and traces of a 3rd were found last March. But no corpses have ever come to light at Boiardo's. People thought to have died there are listed officially as missing persons. Even the big shots of Cosa Nostra approach Boiardo's Notorious estate with respect. In November 1957, when the High Council met there to whack up the territory of the late Albert Anastasia, they came and left all in a group, thus avoiding the path described by Russo, way up in back. Richie Boiardo and the 2 fellow mobsters who discussed the crematorium as casually as 2 men might compare golf scores are alive and free men at this writing. They conduct various legal and illegal enterprises in New Jersey and are notably prosperous. Deep in the rackets since Prohibition days, with a reputation for unabashed savagery, Boiardo gets paid $4,000 a month out of the mob's Las Vegas skimming profits. He also runs a legitimate wrecking business. Much of the non-family statuary on his estate was salvaged from buildings he wrecked. His house is built of stones from the old Newark post office. He presently is awaiting trial on a gambling charge and simultaneously is dueling with Internal Revenue. Russo, 48, is the gambling and rackets boss of Monmouth County, New Jersey, and also has interests in Florida. Gyp DiCarlo, 65, an obese character who detests his nickname, like Boiardo, is a capo in the Genovese family. He grows fat off gambling and loan shark rackets in Union County, New Jersey, and operates crap games that float from borough to borough in New York City. Like countless others in the rackets, Boiardo, Russo, and DiCarlo are virtually laws unto themselves, answerable only to the invisible government to which they owe their sole allegiance, Cosa Nostra. How Joe Bonanno schemed and lost. If Cosa Nostra has a failing at all from the standpoint of efficiency, it is the fact that it is composed at all levels of total scoundrels. Loyalty, as most men understand it, simply does not exist. Though elaborate oaths are required for membership in most cities, the members hang together mainly for the enormous profit this makes possible, and also out of fear of the consequences if they do otherwise. Consider, for example, the case of Joseph Joe Bananas Bonanno, the New York mobster whose greed almost broke up the syndicate. The mob's ruling council was organized in 1931 by Lucky Luciano and Al Capone, and Bonanno, then a mean, ambitious 26-year-old, was given charter membership as the representative of a Brooklyn gang. It was not until 1963 that the name Cosa Nostra became part of the American idiom. That was the year Joe Valachi, a small-time killer for the mob, decided to spill the Brotherhood's secrets to federal agents and then, on network television, to a congressional committee. As Valachi detailed it, and as some lawmen were already aware, each of the commissioners serving on the ruling council is the head of a subdivision called a family, which more or less has free rein over the rackets in its own territory. Any disputes over territorial jurisdictions are settled by the commission. At present, there are 8 commissioners on the ruling council. Vito Genovese of New York and New Jersey, now in the federal penitentiary at Leavenworth, Carlo Gambino of New York, Magaddino of Buffalo, Joe Colombo of New York, Joe Zerilli of Detroit, Momo Salvatore, Sam Giancana of Chicago, Angelo Bruno of Philadelphia, and the aforementioned Joe Bonanno. There was a 9th member, Thomas Three-Finger Brown Lucchese, who died of natural causes in July. The vacancy is still up for grabs. Collectively, they are not a physically imposing lot, nor even frightening. 5 of them are over 60. Magaddino at 75 is widely spoken of, though never to his face as a senile and autocratic windbag. Giancana is 59. Bruno, a tubby hypochondriac to whom the greeting, "How are you?" is an invitation to deliver an organ recital, is 57. Even Colombo, at 43, does not stack up as much of a headbreaker. Yet the thing to remember is that they got where they are and have managed to stay there by killing people. The troublemaker in the executive club was Joe Bonanno, a fact that stemmed from his aggressive and inventive nature. A lot of his innovations worked out very well, for instance, the split-level coffin. As the Boiardo incinerator disclosure points out, disposal of the bodies of victims has always been a problem taxing the mobster's ingenuity. Bonanno solved it in Brooklyn by acquiring a funeral home. To get rid of unwanted corpses, he had them stuffed into the lower compartment of a specially built casket of his own design. The corpse of record lay in the upper compartment, with family and cemetery keepers none the wiser. When such a tandem burial was to be held, Bonanno supplied muscular pallbearers who could carry the extra weight without strain. Bonanno's victims in the lower berths were put underground before police even became aware they were missing. By 1963, at the age of 58, Bonanno had lost none of his ambition and had developed a vast disdain for his fellow commissioners, some of whom had been mere car thieves when he was already on the council. He habitually staked out for himself areas deemed open by the commission, such as the US Southwest and Canada. "He's planting flags all over the world," fumed Commissioner Magaddino when Bonanno muscled into Magaddino's Canadian preserves. The greedy Bonanno was doing more than planting flags. Seeing a chance to seize control of the Brotherhood, he issued contracts for the murders of 3 fellow commissioners, Magaddino, Lucchesi, and Gambino, and another contract for the slaying of the head of a family in California, Frank DeSimone. Bonanno assigned the New York murders to one Joe Magliocco, a fat hoodlum with high blood pressure. Magliocco in turn farmed the New York murder contracts out to an ambitious young torpedo named Joe Colombo. Colombo turned out to be more of an angler than a triggerman. He tipped off the commission to Bonanno's planned coup, and they hurriedly convened a meeting to deal with the treachery. Magliocco and Bonanno were summoned to face charges. Magliocco appeared in a panic, made a full confession, was banished from Cosa Nostra, fined $50,000 and sent home. Shortly thereafter he died of a heart attack. Meanwhile, his family and his commission seat were given to the stool pigeon Colombo. Joe Bonanno never showed up for trial. He hid out on the West Coast using the name J. Santone. Then, in 1964, he went to Canada to poach once more on Magaddino's grounds. Magaddino went into a frenzy, calling a commission meeting for September 18, 1964, in the Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, home of gangster Thomas Eboli. Bonanno ignored that meeting too, despite the entreaties of the commission's emissary Sam Giancana, whose biggest previous distinction had been in trying to develop a garbage disposal unit that would reduce a human body to a meatball. In the face of Bonanno's insults, the council accepted the advice of its Chicago commissioner, Momo Giancana. His advice was, "Kill, kill. Why don't you just kill the guy?" On October 14th, Magaddino met in Buffalo with 2 men. An informant has recalled bits of the conversation. "New York lawyer, we got the car." Then 7 nights later, Bonanno and 4 lawyers dined in a New York steakhouse. A 6th man joined them about 11 p.m. He left the table twice, walking out in a rainstorm to use a corner phone. Shortly after midnight, Bonanno's party left the restaurant in taxis. The 6th man, who took a separate taxi, got out at 37th Street and Park Avenue and beckoned to 2 men standing on the corner. A few minutes later, Bonanno arrived at an apartment house a block away. The 2 men stepped up and forced Bonanno into a car at gunpoint. Though there have been all sorts of speculation about the kidnapping, including a theory that Bonanno staged the whole thing to avoid an appearance before a grand jury, the fact is that he was held for about 6 weeks somewhere in the Catskills. There he talked his captors out of killing him by raising the specters of a nationwide gang war if they knocked him off. But if they let him go, he promised to turn over his gang and his rackets in gratitude. Apparently the commissioners' lust for loot exceeded their lust for vengeance, for they turned him loose in December 1964. Bonanno was only fooling. He went to Haiti to bide his time, then returned to New York last year to rally his gang, claim his place on the commission and continue his invasion of Canada. Magaddino still howls about it, but the other commissioners, perhaps afraid of the guns in Bonanno's family, seem intent on vying to ignore him, hoping he'll go away or something. The grisly infighting for crime power was demonstrated when Joseph Joe Bonanno grabbed for total control of the mob. To achieve his goal, Bonanno ordered the assassination of 4 of his fellow bosses, Buffalo's Steve Magaddino, and from Left Below, Los Angeles' Frank DeSimone, and Carlo Gambino, and Thomas Three-Finger Brown Lucchese, both of New York City. After the plot was exposed, the leaders sent Sam Giancana, boss of a New Jersey family, to summon Bonanno to a Cosa Nostra trial. He refused and was later kidnapped. He talked his way free and, after lying low for months, reappeared last year. Now he has reasserted his power and again is grabbing for more. This cartoon map shows how organized crime spans and penetrates the country, with interests ranging from extortion, narcotics, prostitution, loan sharking, and every conceivable form of gambling to hijacking, bootlegging, and murder for hire. As indicated, the hoods have also gone legit, muscling into such varied enterprises as banking, music recording, trucking, garbage collecting, and undertaking. Red stars mark the home territory of members of the commission that rules Cosa Nostra, and whose portraits are shown in the storm cloud above the map. Under a truce arrangement that is more or less respected by all mobsters, Las Vegas and Miami are open cities where any family may operate. Broken lines indicate routes taken by bagmen carrying skim money, the millions of dollars siphoned tax-free from gambling receipts in Las Vegas and the Bahamas. Meyer Lansky, the multimillionaire non-member who masterminds the skimming intrigues of Cosa Nostra from his base in Miami, sees that a portion of the loot gets to the mob's bank accounts in Switzerland after taking a hefty cut for himself. The disturbing fact is that the mob today is spread across the land and has been able to insinuate itself into the core of society. Most Americans are just not aware of the extent of its influence. Cosa Nostra is a cartel of 24 semi-independent families that vary widely in size, from 20 to 1,000 members, and their importance in the rackets. Each family unit is headed by a boss, and several of these bosses, the current number is 8, sit on Cosa Nostra's ruling commission. The other family heads, shown flanking the map, are not necessarily less powerful than individual commissioners. Raymond Patriarca in New England and Carlos Marcello in Louisiana, for example, are more powerful than some who sit on the ruling body, but they generally follow the commission's edicts. Second in command in each family is the underboss. Beneath him are squads known as regimes, each headed by a capo, captain, and staffed by younger or less accomplished thugs known as soldiers. When a member grows old or infirm, he may become a consigliere, sort of a mobster emeritus who serves only as an advisor to the boss. The boss passes orders down the chain of command, a system designed to screen the top man from the police. The boss has tremendous authority in his own territory, presiding over all gangland enterprises. He is a partner in everything and umpiring intra-gang frictions, as New England boss Patriarca is shown doing in the Boston gang war in the map at left. The membership rolls of Cosa Nostra supposedly have been closed since 1957, an attempt by the Commission to prevent a recruiting race that might upset the delicate balance of power within the fraternity. Nevertheless, some families continue to add new members when an old one dies, and despite the decrepitude of the present commissioners, there is no shortage of ambitious younger talent waiting to take over. In the old days, a recruit had to take part in at least one murder before he was accepted, but during the World War II manpower shortage, standards slipped, and later, as murder became a less popular tactic, many gangsters were let in who never had made a fatal score. This irks some old-timers. As one graying hood complained, "Today you got 1,000 guys in here that never broke an egg." At the heart of every successful gangster's operation is the fix, the working arrangement with key police and elected officials and business and union executives. It guarantees the racketeers room to swing and a certain amount of acceptance in respectable circles. For sheer audacity and sweep, few fixes the mob has ever undertaken could top a plot just now unfolding in New Orleans, where the Cosa Nostra is ruled over by Carlos Marcello, opposite page. Its hoped-for objective is liberty for James Hoffa, the imprisoned boss of the Teamsters Union. Life has found conclusive evidence that Hoffa's pals, some in the union, some in the mob, some in both, dropped $2 million into a Springhoffer fund late last year. The money was placed at the disposal of Cosa Nostra mobsters, and it was to be payable to anyone who could wreck the government's jury tampering case on which Hoffa had been convicted. In due course, the money was made available to Marcello to do the job. The chief government witness in the trial, which took place in 1964 in Chattanooga, had been Edward Grady Partin, leader of a Teamster local in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. As the mob saw it, Partin was a logical target for a fix. If he could be persuaded somehow to recant his own testimony, or to taint it by claiming that wiretaps had been used against Hoffa, the conviction would surely be reversed. By last January, the mob might have assumed that Partin already had been softened up. A series of dynamite explosions had wrecked construction sites, trucks, and oil drilling rigs of companies whose employees were members of Partin's union. Partin got the message all right, but ignored it. Then another pitch was made to Partin. It was arranged by Aubrey Young, 45, who for years had been an aide and confidant of Louisiana Governor John J. McKeithen. Though the governor did not know it, Young had some curious contacts outside of the executive suite. One of these was Marcello, about whose empire you will read more in next week's installment. In January, Young set up a meeting with Partin at the request of still another man of influence in Louisiana politics, a sometime public relations specialist and all-around operator named Dalton Smith. Members of Smith's family are well placed in Louisiana. His brother, A.D. Smith, is a member of the State Board of Education. His sister, Mrs. Frances Pecora, is an official of the State Insurance Commission. Mrs. Pecora is also the wife of Nofio Pecora, former operator of the Marcello-owned Town and Country Motel in New Orleans. The meeting with Partin took place at Young's house in Baton Rouge. Smith was there when Partin arrived. Dalton had told me he wanted to see if he could straighten out Partin's testimony to help Hoffa. Young has since told Life. When I saw what they were talking about in the parlor, I took a walk because I didn't want any part of it. After the meeting, Dalton told me that he couldn't budge Partin, that Partin said his testimony was true. Partin confirmed to Life that this indeed was the subject of the conversation, and has added these details of the inducements he says were held out to him. The initial offer for the changing of his testimony was $25,000 a year for 10 years. He turned it down. The ante was hiked until it reached an overall total of $1 million. Still, Partin refused. When Smith gave it up as a bad job and went away, Partin called the Justice Department. A short time later, Young, who had been drinking heavily, sought sanctuary for 3 days in the Town and Country Motel, which is Marcello's racket's headquarters. Young has offered this explanation. I go to the Town and Country because there's always lots of politicians there. I did not see Carlos or talk to him. I know I didn't, because there was a state policeman with me all the time. Meanwhile, in response to Partin's call, the Justice Department began an investigation into the bribery attempt. Young returned to the capital at Baton Rouge. When the governor asked him to explain his absence, Young blurted out the story of the attempted bribery of Partin. Furious, McKeithen threatened to fire him. Young resigned. As to what has happened to the $2 million, Marcello, of course, is not talking, and Hoffa remains in federal prison. This is a fair example of the intricate forces involved in a particular sort of fix. But a fix does not have to entail an exchange of money. It can be accomplished by putting in fear through means as unsubtle as a crack over the head, an arm broken by twisting, an implied disclosure of family skeletons, a hoarse voice on the phone, a timely murder. It can be accomplished by campaign contributions or by outright bribes. It can be attained. This is a fair example of the intricate forces involved in a particular sort of fix. But a fix does not have to entail an exchange of money. It can be accomplished by putting in fear through means as unsubtle as a crack over the head, an arm broken by twisting, an implied disclosure of family skeletons, a hoarse voice on the phone, a timely murder. It can be accomplished by campaign contributions or by outright bribes. It can be attained through employment of public relations counsels who stress things like the good name of a city, or the amount of money donated to charity by mob enterprises, or who plant in newspaper columns evidences of the charm, wit, and good connections of key mobsters as they are seen about the spots where expensive people gather. It can be helped immeasurably with cheap devices like easy loans to a reporter whose tastes outrun his income. A big city mayor may have nothing but loathing for mobsters. Yet if disclosure of corruption in his city threatens the tenure of his political machine, he may make every effort to suppress the story, rationalizing that the city would be much worse off with the opposition in control. This is a solid dividend of the fix. Ask any gangster. The information and entertainment media, and ultimately the public themselves, play their part in all of this. Too often they take a scriptwriter's view of gangsters, viewing them as one would look at tenants of the great ape house at the zoo, with vague thrills of identity but with amused tolerance. When Frank Sinatra appears in public with Sam Giancana, who is a killer and a crock, the tendency is to see Sinatra as a bigger swinger than ever, not just another entertainer who has some crummy friends. Giancana is a pretty good exhibit when it comes to illustrating the manicuring of guerrillas. Despite his absence from the country, his fix in Chicago remains as tight and traditional as any you could find. Giancana took over the 300-member Chicago Cosa Nostra family, the outfit as it is called locally, in 1957, after it became apparent to him that the incumbent boss, Tony Accardo, was getting too slow and too rich. Giancana's decision was brought home to Accardo by a bullet fired over his head as Tony was entering his spacious $500,000 estate in suburban River Forest. He understood. Sam Giancana is a frail, gnome-like man whose constant cigar smoking has deformed his upper lip into a permanent sneer. Back in World War II, when asked by the draft board what he did for a living, he replied, "I steal." He was adjudged a psychopath, and Sam figures it was a bad rap. "I was telling them the truth," he said. Before he was old enough to vote, he had been arrested 3 times for murder. He likes the girls. For one, he purchased a remounted 30-carat stolen diamond from a fence in New York, and has made international headlines as the recurrent escort of singer Phyllis McGuire. He likes to play golf, and when FBI agents began bothering his game when they had him under surveillance in 1963, he went to federal court and got an order stipulating that the agents must stay 2 foursomes back. Ultimately, the agents won that round. Giancana was called before a grand jury, granted immunity from prosecution stemming from anything he might say, and, when he refused to answer questions, served a year in jail for contempt. Fearing another such sentence, he has stayed pretty much out of the country ever since. For a time, control of the outfit fell to Giancana's lieutenants, but as federal prosecutions sent several of them to jail, family matters demanded a more experienced hand at the helm. One current theory is that Accardo has come out of retirement to resume active control. The truth is that Giancana is still running things by remote control from a hideout in Mexico, a posh castle near Cuernavaca, where he poses as Riccardo Scalzetti. The real Scalzetti, Giancana's erstwhile chauffeur and courier, is more familiar to Chicagoans as Richard Kane, a well-known former Chicago policeman and more recently a private investigator. In Chicago, where racketeering was perfected, the connection between the mob and the politicians remains extensive and arrogant. From an office across from City Hall, there are men ready to carry out Giancana's wishes and attend to the clockwork of the fix. It is a matter of pride to Giancana and his boys that they are firmly in control of both the Democratic and the Republican political organizations in Chicago. The Democratic organizations of 2 other West Side wards, the 20th and the 29th, are also nominally chattels of the mob. But the real gangster operative power, for obvious reasons, is in the 1st. The 1st Ward Republican apparatus is a joke. Giancana's men permit it to exist only so they can have a foot in both parties. The Hoods have been known to round up a few thousand GOP votes in certain elections, just to avoid embarrassing Democratic winners, with heavy pluralities from a gangster-dominated political organization. But aside from being something to scratch matches on, Republicans in the 1st Ward are handy in other ways. In Mexico City this year, for example, Giancana and Miss McGuire tooled around in a white Oldsmobile licensed to Peter Granata, the present Republican committeeman in the 1st Ward. Although Cosa Nostra control over the 3 wards is as well known to many Chicagoans as the Water Tower, Mayor Richard J. Daley, the longtime guru of Cook County's Democrats, stays aloof. As Chicago mayors have always done, Mayor Daley tends to bristle at allegations of organized corruption in his city as being something less than patriotic. Leadership of ward organizations, he contends, is the exclusive concern of the people in the wards. First Ward Democratic headquarters, just across LaSalle Street from City Hall, is a handily located, permanently established center of political corruption. Here, politicians, policemen, newsmen, and other useful people troop into the office for favors given and received. As in few other cities, certain journalists are part and parcel of the First Ward fix. The First Ward Democratic organization, if it serves the gangsters' needs, can, and on occasion, does swing enough influence in city rooms to get a story killed or softened to the point where it is almost an apology. The principal dispersing officer, and Giancana's main liaison with the First Ward healers, is Pat Marcy, who served a prison term for robbery back before he became secretary of the First Ward Democratic Organization. Details of the First Ward's bribe trafficking were spelled out in a 1963 report on police corruption in Chicago by the U.S. Department of Justice. The report, naming names, disclosed specific payoffs that kept police from cracking down on centers of vice operated by the Giancana mob. But Police Superintendent Orlando W. Wilson, a man with a reputation for incorruptibility, reacted in much the same manner as Mayor Daley, scoffing at the report as gossip, and refusing to take any action against accused bribe-takers on the police force, including his administrative assistant, Sergeant Paul Quinn. Wilson retired August 1st. Quinn remains on the force as administrative assistant to Wilson's successor, James B. Conlisk, Jr. Giancana rules the First Ward like a Tartar warlord. He can brush an alderman off the city council with a gesture of his hand, as he did in 1962, when he ordered the resignation of Alderman John Darko. It was all brought to a head by a Darko faux pas. He and Giancana were seated at a restaurant table when an FBI agent, well known to both men, approached. Darko reacted as a politician leaped to his feet and shook hands with the agent. Giancana disapproved. Exit Alderman, Darko. State Senator Anthony DeTolve, a relative of Giancana's late wife, was nominated to succeed Darko. 4 days before the aldermanic election, the gang boss capriciously decided that DeTolve would not do either. In the ensuing confusion, the First Ward wound up without an alderman for a year. Not many constituents could discern any difference. For 7 years, U.S. Representative Roland Libonati was one of the tame congressmen from the First Ward. Libby got on the powerful House Judiciary Committee and became something of a Capitol Hill landmark. Tony Tisci, Giancana's son-in-law, was on the government payroll at $12,000 a year as Libonati's assistant. In 1962, for reasons still undisclosed, Giancana decided that Libonati was a liability. The hapless congressman submitted without a protest, and for stated reasons of his wife's ill health, obediently did not run for re-election in 1964. Tisci stayed on as assistant to Libonati's successor, Frank Annunzio. The grand jury investigation that jailed Giancana eventually dislodged Tisci from Annunzio's payroll. The disclosure that Tisci had refused to talk to the jury, pleading fear of self-incrimination, was followed by his resignation as Annunzio's aide. Marcy and Darko were also Fifth Amendment witnesses, but there, as might be expected, the matter rested. United States Attorney Edward Vafiv Hanrahan, a Democratic appointee, did not extend immunity to Tisci, Marcy and Darko, even though they, like Giancana, had balked at testifying. Immunity for them might have been embarrassing for Mayor Daley's Democratic machine. It would have given the three the choice of exposing the workings of Giancana's captive organization or, like him, going to jail. For some years, Giancana's political courier was the master fixer of the Chicago mob, the late Notorious Murray Humphreys. Using the name Mr. Pope, he frequently delivered messages and packages to Libonati and other members of the Illinois congressional delegation. Humphreys died in 1965, and some of his political duties now fall to Gus Alex, who runs the rackets for Giancana in the First Ward. Giancana, perhaps spellbound by his acquaintances among celebrities and his control overpaid for political hacks, has been known to overstep his own influence. Once, during a time of tight surveillance by the FBI, he dispatched his aide-de-camp, a hoodlum named Charles English, with a message for the G-men who were waiting outside for him to leave a saloon. The message was an invitation to Robert F. Kennedy, then the Attorney General, to sit down and talk over calling the agents off. English made quite a sales pitch. Elected officials all over the country, hundreds of them, owe their jobs to Mo, he explained proudly. His parting words were equally blithe. Mo says that if Kennedy wants to talk, he should get in touch with Frank Sinatra to set it up. Kennedy passed up the bid, and along about that time Sinatra fell out of New Frontier favor. The FBI continued its investigations, resulting in a 1965 jail sentence for Giancana. Some of Giancana's lieutenants have their own connections with politicians, officials, and important people. Gus Alex has an especially warm relationship with Chicago's city treasurer, Marshall Korshak, and his brother, attorney Sidney Korshak. Sidney is a friend of other leading Chicago gangsters. A message from him. Sidney, a prominent mobster once was quoted on a witness stand, is a message from us. On Alex's application in 1957 for an apartment on exclusive Lakeshore Drive, he described himself as a $15,000 a year employee of Marshall Korshak, then a state senator. Among political favors rendered by paid-for officials to Cosa Nostra are the passing along of information that comes over their desks and the sending up of storm signals whenever official action against the mob is threatened. In 1962, for example, Attorney General Kennedy sent his federal prosecutors a list of gangsters to be investigated, stipulating that the list be held in strict secrecy within the Department of Justice. In a matter of weeks, a copy of the list turned up in a Michigan Avenue office used by Giancana and Alex. Fans of Sinatra and Miss Maguire might reconsider their acceptance of Giancana as a social figure if they had heard a conversation which took place in Miami a few years ago among 3 Giancana employees. So, for that matter, might Sinatra and Miss Maguire. The subject was William Jackson, a grotesque slugger for the outfit who weighed well over 350 pounds. Jackson somehow had gotten out of line and had to be dealt with. As faithfully related by an informant, James Torello and Fiore Buccieri were telling John, Jackie Cerrone with some glee how they had gone about it. Jackson was hung up on that meat hook, said Torello. He was so heavy he bent it. He was on that thing 3 days before he croaked. Buccieri began to giggle. Jackie, you should have seen the guy. Like an elephant he was. And when Jimmy hit him in the with that electric prod. Torello interrupted excitedly. He was flopping around on that hook, Jackie. We tossed water on him to give the prod a better charge, and he's screaming. The conversation turned animatedly to other methods of dispensing Giancana's brand of justice. Except for the revolting subject matter, they might have been men sitting around a bait shop discussing favorite fishing lures. The stretcher is best, insisted Torello. Put a guy on it with chains and you can stretch him until his joints pop. Remember the guy that sweat so much he dried out? He was always wanting water. I think he died of thirst. Once again a reminder, these men are members of Giancana's Cosa Nostra family. He was and still is the boss who gives people like Buccieri and Torello the contracts for killing people like the late heavy William Jackson. The cardinal principle of the fix is immutable, i.e., be with winners. Politically, this is conducive to bipartisanship. Do like we do in Chicago, counseled Sam Giancana when he was reviewing his secret investments in the Stardust Casino in Las Vegas in 1961. Give to both parties, naturally, when the delicate matter of investments of this sort is at issue. The man whose know-how is most prized is Meyer Lansky. Though not a Cosa Nostra member, he is Jewish. He is the mob's chief financial counselor. As such, he was the architect of the Skim, the system whereby tax-free cash is siphoned off the top of casino profits in Nevada. Nevada has been open territory for Cosa Nostra racketeers ever since legalized gambling made Las Vegas synonymous with high rolling. The mobs from Cleveland, Chicago, Miami, and New York all had representatives looking after their hidden interests, and therefore had something of a stake in Nevada politics. Small wonder, then, that Giancana saw fit to give people advice. Nor is it at all remarkable that the Fremont Casino in Las Vegas found it necessary to obtain the personal approval of Lansky for its $19,000 budget for political contributions in 1963, $5,000 for a justice of the Nevada Supreme Court, $200 to a justice of the peace, $300 to a county commissioner, $500 to a state assemblyman, and $500 to a candidate for lieutenant governor. That was local. Another $1,000 was anted up for a national political figure and $12,000 for his opponent. The payoff, of course, was influence in Las Vegas, Carson City, and Washington, not just for Ed Levinson, operator of the Fremont, but also for Lansky. At the time, Levinson had another very useful connection in Washington. Both he and Benjamin Siegelbaum, the bagman who transported the Skim money to Lansky in Miami Beach, were partners of Bobby Baker in the Serve-You vending machine enterprise. Baker, it will be recalled, was then the Senate Majority Secretary, as well as a chief dispenser of funds for the Senate Democratic Campaign Committee and confidant and protege of the then Senate Majority Leader, Lyndon Johnson. The philosophy behind all this was perhaps most succinctly explained by Major Riddle, operator of the opulent Dunes Casino of Las Vegas. When the owners yelped about a $20,000 contribution to a man very high in then-Governor Grant Sawyer's office, Riddle gave an explanation, which an informant has passed along. "The guy does whatever we want. Any one of the things he does for us would bring in $20,000. And besides," Riddle added, "the contribution in question was an economy when compared with the $200,000 the Desert Inn had anted up for another influential politician." Riddle told the informant later about the nuances of political giving and taking. The case in point was the gambling license for Irving Devine, a local racketeer. Devine was prepared to make a hefty political contribution of $50,000 to the Nevada governor's campaign for re-election, Riddle said, in return for his license. "That's the only way our guy would do it," said Riddle. "You know, in a campaign he needs funds. Any other time it's something else again." Unfortunately for Devine, a federal report disclosing his ties with skimming racketeers began to circulate around Nevada shortly afterward. Any talk of a gambling license for Devine became a dead issue. The fix is by no means limited to wide-open Nevada and the political backrooms of Chicago. It also flourishes in New England with a ruthlessness that is a point of personal pride to the resident Cosa Nostra proconsul, Raymond Patriarca. At 59, Patriarca has two distinctions in Cosa Nostra. When it comes to manipulating the makers and enforcers of the law, he has few peers. His tightly disciplined 150-member gang operates a dazzling array of rackets and legitimate businesses over Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Maine. He is also known as the only Cosa Nostra boss to operate for more than 3 years within range of an FBI microphone. The Cosa Nostra commissioners have held several discussions to decide how this mountainous blunder should be dealt with. Bosses have been killed for less. The bug itself, planted by the FBI in Patriarca's office in Providence, Rhode Island, was bad enough. But Patriarca compounded the original security breach by letting some of the taped transcripts get into the federal court record. In this, his arrogance played a major role. It all involved the income tax fraud trial of one of his capos, Louis Taglianetti. When Taglianetti was found guilty, Patriarca made his big mistake by ordering an appeal of the conviction. This ultimately forced the introduction of the bugged tape transcripts into the record. The way Cosa Nostra sees it, far better Taglianetti should have served his 7 months in the first place. Among the disclosures in the FBI records, Patriarca is the referee of the celebrated gang war that has plagued Boston for more than 3 years. He presides over the shabby scene with such authority that nobody is killed without his permission. At least a dozen of the 40-odd victims were slain on his direct orders. The bug picked up conversations among Patriarca and his capos concerning the slayings. The assassins themselves were named. At one point, when his own declaration of an armistice was not being observed, Patriarca proclaimed angrily that he was about to declare martial law. All types of crime in his bailiwick, not just the organized kind, are cleared by Patriarca, among them bank robberies, hijackings, arson, jewel thefts, and kidnappings. Such information, needless to say, was priceless intelligence for law officials. It was also a temporary lease on life for gangsters William Mafia and John Biella, who had fallen out of favor with Cosa Nostra. The bug revealed Patriarca's various plots to kill the pair over a period of months, and on each occasion FBI agents man-aged to tip them off, as well as the police. A ban on bugging in 1965 forced disconnection of the microphone in Patriarca's office. Within a year, Maffeo was slain in Providence. Biele was murdered in Miami last March. As a mob boss, Raymond Patriarca sits as something of a judge himself, sometimes over the affairs of politicians. On one such instance, in 1963, a top official of the Rhode Island state government, much in Patriarca's debt, had been defeated for re-election. One of his backers, a Warwick, Rhode Island businessman, had contributed $17,000 to the unsuccessful campaign and wanted his money back, claiming it had been a loan. "Not so," said the politician. "It was an outright gift." Patriarca himself held court on the matter behind the vending machines in his Coinomatic office in Providence. Unsurprisingly, he ruled for the defendant. The $17,000 was a gift. Judge Patriarca advised the businessman to forget it. He did. Patriarca is far warier with his own political contributions. His political payoffs are held in a bank account that has come to be known as Raymond's Escrow Fund. It is released to deserving political servants only after they have delivered for Raymond Patriarca. A good example of this device was a battle in 1963 in the Massachusetts legislature over proposed extension of the racing season at the Berkshire Downs racetrack at Hancock, Mass. At the time, Patriarca and the late Thomas Lucchese were among the hoodlums holding secret interests in the track. More racing days were needed at the track to keep it from going bankrupt. Patriarca spread the word that there would be an added purse of $25,000 in Raymond's escrow fund for dispersal, if the track got a lengthened season. There was a stormy floor fight in the legislature. Patriarca's forces lost, but the $25,000 remained in Raymond's escrow fund. But in routine matters, Patriarca's fix, in spite of his tendency to talk too much about it, has worked smoothly. To cite an example, on Friday afternoon, July 27, 1962, a high-ranking state police officer flashed a yellow alert to Jerry Angiulo, Patriarca's underboss in Boston, that there was going to be a raid the next day on gambling joints at Revere Beach. When the raiders arrived, Patriarca's 5 joints were demurely closed. The police raided only the independent gamblers who had been foolish enough to refuse to cut Angiulo and the mob in on their operations. On the following Tuesday, Angiulo's 5 casinos reopened at new addresses and quickly lapped up the business of the gamblers who had been shut down in the raid. 3 years later, in June 1965, with the fix working smoothly as ever, the whole sequence of Jigger's shut-down raid reopening was reenacted at Revere. If the commission does not decide to eliminate him, Patriarca eventually could be tripped up by his own heavy-handed greed. Right now, the chief witness against him in a conspiracy case awaiting trial is Joseph Barbosa, a 35-year-old triggerman whom Patriarca had assigned in June 1965 to kill Maffeo, one of the occasions when Maffeo was tipped off. Later, Barbosa was imprisoned on an unrelated charge. His gangster friends immediately set about collecting funds to pay for an appeal. 2 of them were waylaid by Patriarca's men and shot dead. The killers walked off with the $80,000 they had collected. Barbosa, stranded behind bars and enraged at the double cross, became a government witness. Patriarca may live to regret it. The fix, like any other form of commerce, is peculiarly susceptible to the winds of inflation. Nowhere was this more apparent than in New Jersey, home of Vito Genovese and other thieving murderers and politicians. In February 1963, 3 men sat down in a ramshackle club called The Barn on Route 22 in Mountainside, New Jersey, to discuss the rising cost of fixing police officials. 2 of them were the gabby old friends who discussed Richie Boiardo's beckoning incinerator, Angelo DiCarlo and Tony Russo, the Genovese family's betting boss in Monmouth County. Russo's sobriquet in the mob is Little Pussy. His brother John Big Pussy did a stretch for murder. Also at the table was an informant for a law enforcement agency, and the minutes of that meeting, kept secret until now, have been a key factor in the recent amassing of intelligence by federal officials on New Jersey mob activities. The specific complaint of the 2 gangsters was the forthright grabbiness of a top-level officer in the New Jersey State Police. Russo said the police official was collecting $250 a month for ignoring bookies around Monmouth Park racetrack. plus $1,000 a month in gambling payoffs in Long Branch, and another $1,000 from Asbury Park. As if this were not enough, Joe Ziccarelli, a Bonanno capo who bosses bookie and lottery action in Hudson County, was paying, according to Russo and DiCarlo, an additional $5,000 a month. And now, to top it off, Russo complained, this guy had the gall to demand double payoffs for each month of the summer season, when resorts like Asbury Park and Long Branch boom and does gambling. The irony of it all, DiCarlo added bitterly, was that he, Russo, and Ziccarelli had only themselves to blame. They had personally picked their greedy policeman and arranged for a well-connected Hudson County politico to promote him to his high place on the force. DiCarlo promised to talk soon to the same politician about the state policeman's unseemly greed. Whatever was said at that meeting, the result was negative, for the police officer continued to extort heavy payoffs from DiCarlo, Russo, and Ziccarelli until his retirement, 2 years later. Expensive though he was worth too much to the mob to warrant getting rid of him. He represented what is called in Cosa Nostra a solid setup, the ultimate protection, a direct hand-to-pocket fix with a top law enforcement official in a policy-making position. The power of the fix in certain areas of New Jersey is just about total. In Long Branch, for example, a town of 26,000 on the Jersey Shore, Russo told the informant that the mob had taken charge. Russo bragged they had fixed elections and maneuver the ouster of a city manager. What we got in Long Branch is everything, said Russo. Police we got. Councilmen we got too. We're going to make millions. Russo said that another capo, Richie Boiardo no less, keeper of the crematorium near Livingston, was wanting to muscle into the Long Branch bonanza with some road construction contracting. DiCarlo figured Boiardo was out of bounds on this. He and his son Anthony already had all they deserved with all the electric work in Newark. Anthony Boiardo lists his occupation as public relations man for an electrical contracting firm in Newark. Several federal agencies have confirmed and supplemented the information on the Russo-DiCarlo talk. One investigation stemming from it disclosed that DiCarlo, Ziccarelli, and Ruggiero Boiardo had combined to maneuver the friend of another gangster into office as police superintendent of a large New Jersey city. The mob-selected police chief used to work as a doorman at crap games run by gangster John Lardiere. Actually, beyond Joe Ziccarelli's outwardly modest position as head of a bookie and lottery syndicate in Hudson County does him considerable injustice. True, in New Jersey, his interlocking tie-ups with scores of Hudson County officials are so expensive that some gangsters consider him a connection-crazy wastrel. But Ziccarelli has an international sideline so extensive that he is practically a one-man State Department for the mob. He has holdings in Venezuela and the Dominican Republic, and throughout the hemisphere is known as the man to see for guns and munitions when a government is to be overthrown or a rebellion is to be put down. For example, through the years he shipped arms to Dominican leaders, selling with fine and profitable impartiality to Trujillo and the men who overthrew him. In next week's issue, more will appear on Ziccarelli's business interests. Even Ziccarelli's domestic connections extend well beyond the confines of Hudson County into the chambers of the U.S. Congress itself. Indeed, he is on the best of terms with the widely respected Democratic representative from Hudson County, Congressman Cornelius E. Gallagher. Gallagher is one of the bulwarks of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and was seriously mentioned before the 1964 Democratic Convention as a possible running mate for Lyndon Johnson. Bayonne Joe and his congressman seem to have a lot to talk over, judging from the frequency of their get-togethers. These usually take place a long way from Washington or Bayonne, where Gallagher lives, and Ziccarelli runs the rackets. Sometimes the setting is a picturesque wayside inn off the Sawmill River Parkway north of New York, and the occasion is an unhurried and chummy Sunday brunch.